Doctor, what's up?
Just looking at a nice cold and rainy spring day here. I know that rain's hard at work, making the golf courses green though. So it's all good.
Love it. Love it. We talked last week a little bit about pelvis, kind of jumped into some things and kind of really started off this hierarchy of discussion for us. One of this week, as we discussed last session, wanted to talk about lead leg extension. So I know you've been doing some research this week. Kind of give me a little rundown on what you found and what exists in prior research for lead leg.
Yeah. So when we're looking at the lead leg, and in a way, we almost wanted to do lead leg and then pelvis, because what happens with the lead leg does influence the pelvis position. What we know is that lead leg is going to stabilize the front of the body and allow the person to start rotating freely and get into the rest of their pitching delivery. So it's really the key part of that energy transmission into the ground to get to the rest of the body. When we talk about the kinematic sequence, or we talk about the kinetic chain, it's really the most important part, because the energy only diminishes down that chain. So what you can get at the start is big. And what we've seen in the research is that having like a knee flexion angle between about 35 to 50 degrees seems to be significant enough into foot plant to stabilize the leg. But we've also seen that the athletes who throw harder, they have a more extended knee into foot plant. And then after foot plant and into ball release, they extend their knee faster than lower velocity groups. And this has been seen, in a lot of peer-reviewed research articles, but we've also seen it in the KineticPro dataset as well.
Awesome. So clarifying here, flexion is the bending of the knee, extension is the straightening of the knee. Talk to me a little bit about positioning. So we talked about kind of angle there. And we talked about, stabilizing that knee. Can you just give like kind of an overview of maybe what positioning you expect through our three main points here, foot plant to MER to ball release?
Yeah, so you're going to see, like I mentioned, at foot plant around that 35 to 50 degrees of knee flexion. You're going to maybe see a bit of a surge in knee flexion right after foot plant, just as the body sends energy down through that leg and the ground transmit that energy back. But then into ball release, you'll see that extending of the knee. And that peak knee extension velocity is really one of the key markers we look at, whether you want to call it the lead leg block or that lead leg stability. That's a key metric that we're looking at there.
Great. I know you've looked at our data a little bit from the KineticPro set. What do you see in terms of velocity for our guys? I know our guys, to preface it, I know our guys have some higher ball velocity overall. So I'm assuming from what we've talked about that, we're going to see maybe some higher readings in terms of angles and in terms of overall velocity. But what did you see from our data set in our high versus low ball velocity groups?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something to just consider here, that I think your low velocity group averaged around 80 miles an hour with the fastball. The high velocity group, I think, was around 91. So just let's keep that in mind here. These are not low performers by any way. Now, in terms of knee extension velocities, and we measure that in degrees per second, we're going to see around a 150 to just above 200, maybe up to 300 degrees per second knee extension velocity. And we will see that and want to see that peaking somewhere around ball release.
So I'm looking at this chart here that you're showing. I'm seeing 70% to 100%. What is 70% to 100%? And kind of give me a little rundown on maybe what we're seeing here in terms of the differences between the two groups.
Absolutely. So in the ProPlay data set, if you look at that data that comes out in your angles or your velocities tab, you are going to see basically a 0 to 100. 0 is the initiation of movement, and 100 is ball release. And just actually beyond ball release, I think we do, 5 frames beyond ball release there. So when we're looking at the kinematic sequence, and once again in the Pitch AI app or in the Pitch AI portal, that kinematic sequence graph is the final 300 frames of that 1,000 frames there. So that is going to encompass a little bit before foot plant, MER, and ball release. And a lot of research on biomechanics and pitching will often use foot plant as 0% and ball release as 100%. But we've decided to expand that because we think it's pretty important to understand how you get into foot plant, not just what happens at foot plant.
So let's dive into kind of the chart here and maybe dissect a little bit about the difference between our low velocity versus our high velocity chart. What do we got here?
Yeah, so we're seeing in KineticPro green, this is roughly around foot plant, this value here. So you can see that that knee is flexing. So a positive value means that the knee is flexing and picking up speed in the flexion direction. And then as we get into MER, which is somewhere around about this spot on the graph, so around 85%, 80 to 85%, we're going to see that continue to go negative, which means knee extension velocity. And this peak that we're seeing here, you can see about negative 265 degrees per second. That's the knee extension velocity that we're talking about. So positive is flexion, negative is extension. And you can see that that peak is higher in our high velocity group compared to our low velocity group from the KineticPro dataset.
Excellent. What else do you have in terms of positioning of the lead leg? Any further data that you've been looking at?
Yeah. So once again, just to as our caveat here, these are all high performers, right? Your low velocity guys are guys that some of them actually are in minor league systems and Division I programs. So these are by no means low performers. They're just lower on the velocity for their data set here. And their knee flexion angle throughout the entire part from foot plant on is higher than the high velocity group here. So we all see that going into foot plant, there's going to be an increase in knee flexion just as your body absorbs that energy from the ground being transmitted up to the pelvis. And then you extend into ball release. The very high group almost seems like they're able to withstand how much flexion there is because they start more extended, they stay more extended throughout, and then they extend at a higher velocity like we were seeing in the other graph. So, I mean, it looks like the KineticPro guys here are doing a great job of stabilizing that lead leg so that they can transfer the energy to their pelvis. So what are some of the things you do as a coach to really kind of cue your guys or work with somebody who maybe doesn't have optimal positioning of that lead leg?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things we talk about a lot is that, when guys look at this, they see lead knee extension and they think that, to get a higher lead knee extension velocity, they need to put the foot in the ground and almost think like a javelin thrower. They think about just kind of like hyper extending the knee and trying to just like drive it straight into the ground and just focusing on extension. But in reality, the discussion should really go back to what we talked about with the pelvis before and how it correlates and works with the lead leg. So as the pelvis continues to rotate, it's going to drive the lead knee into further extension. So if I continue to rotate my pelvis, if I continue to turn my pelvis, I have to place the lead leg in the ground, stabilize, and it's going to then continue to extend that lead leg. So you watch a lot of guys, Mike, like you and I talk about Nate a lot. And so like Nate, for example, his lead knee goes into the ground. And when it goes into the ground, it actually translates a little bit from being, kind of turned in to then turned out. He braces into the ground and then he begins to extend that lead leg. A lot of that comes to do with the timing of the rotation of his pelvis. A lot of that has to do with just how his trunk rotates and moves around the pelvis. So, he has a higher slot as well. So there's a lot of variables that we pull into this. And it's not always as simple as just extend the lead leg. And a lot of people want to utilize med ball drills, or they want to try to put a guy on the wall and do plyo drills, and they just want to focus on sheerly just slamming the lead foot in the ground and then trying to go. It's important to understand, like you said, Mike, before, there's a strength component, there's a stability component that we really need to address here. And oftentimes as coaches, if we don't assess our athletes appropriately, we can try to drill them to death, where we're trying to give them, a roll-in exercise on, the plyo ball. We're trying to give them roll-ins for, thousands of reps here. And it may not actually fix that kid's issue with the lead leg or fix the timing, because there's an underlying issue with control of the pelvis, or there's an underlying stability issue on the lead leg itself, and unilateral movement. Like, there's a lot of issues that we have to look at here from the human performance side of things, right? From our physicality, our mobility, stability, or strength. We have to address that first, and then build into our actual drill work, as from the pitching side of it, our more skill specific work, and then take it over to the mound, and hopefully it translates into our pro play analysis. So I think that's the biggest approach for us. It's not one specific drill. It's not one size fits all approach. Oftentimes we have to look at the athlete, how they're rotating, the timing of their rotation. Like, for example, I would teach Nate completely different than I would teach somebody else, depending upon how that lead leg gets into, or how that lead foot gets into the ground, and how that lead leg moves. A lot of that comes back to hip structure, hip anatomy. It comes to pelvic control. It comes to overall mobility, stability, strength in multiple areas. Just a lot for us to digest and consider there. Things that I know you and I will probably talk about more into the future. But I think it's great to look at this, and it's really important to understand in terms of the lead knee extension velocity. But we can't oversimplify it and just think about extension alone. It has to be other pieces.
Well, and just to add to that, I think one of the most important uses of pitch AI is in tracking your changes over time. And the systematic review that my research group and Richard Burfer did, we published in Peer J in 2019, we found that lead leg positioning is one of the biggest indicators of fatigue. As somebody becomes more fatigued, that knee does get more flexed as it gets into the ground. So, if you're watching your guys over the course of the season, they're starting to incur some higher workloads, and you're noticing that knee start to flex more during the delivery, there's a good chance that person's experiencing fatigue.
Very interesting. It sounds like we're going to need a whole Hawkeye system for some amateur leagues here to monitor and track. So,
well, actually, Casey, we have a system that's much easier than the Hawkeye now.
Perfect lead.
Yeah, thanks for setting that one up.
Yeah, perfect. No, man, I think it's great. I think this is I'm really excited about where this is going for you guys, and being able to track this over time. I think it's from a performance standpoint, we've always been two things out, right? We've said health and we've said performance. And so from the performance side of things, helping especially those amateur athletes understand where their weaknesses lie, and looking deeper into those weaknesses. It's not that hard to see on a 2D video at times, positioning of the lead leg, right? Like, we can see a guy get, to a certain position. We see that he's, maybe changing that position. But in terms of pelvic rotation, timing of pelvic rotation, and overall velocities, there's almost no way we can actually measure these things. So, it's really important that we take these and do assess these guys over time, see what guys need to adjust, and how they need to get, from a both a strength and from a skill specific standpoint. Important to help these guys get where they need to go, and understand those movement patterns. So it's exciting for where the game's going, man, because at the amateur level especially, like we were joking about with the Hawkeye versus pro play, it's so obtainable for coaches to have pro play. It's so obtainable for players to be able to utilize it, even in a pregame bullpen, right? Like, just pop it up, take a couple videos, and then do an analysis at the end of the game. Or if you can set up a camera open side from the third base or first base side, that you can get a lens on. Those things are going to help us, really analyze guys and see where they're at, time over time. Absolutely. To get a much larger data set. So,
absolutely. Yep. Some exciting stuff coming this summer.
For sure. Well, Mike, next episode, we'll continue to chat more about analyzing the timing of pelvis from our kinematic sequence, continue to take the next steps. Appreciate you hopping on today, Mike. And hopefully that weather clears up a little bit so you can get out and play some golf.
Attaboy. Yep, definitely. We'll talk soon, Casey.
All right, Mike. See ya.
Yeah.